There's hundreds of new things in Path of Exile 2 that deserve to make this list, but if I had to pick just 10 that I'm really excited about, it would be these. Starting with the big one, Endgame. In Path of Exile 2, the primary endgame system, mapping, is now an infinite delve-like atlas. And just like Delve, you can find biomes that contain a specific set of maps, along with special encounters, such as cities, which drop special items, or classics, like Untainted Paradise, for tons of XP. Which is pretty interesting because they showed Untainted Paradise as a literal island, which makes me wonder if you can actually target farm it by clearing maps near water, or similarly, clearing desert biomes to increase the chance of finding reliquary vaults. Now maps also have a couple of additional changes, the first being that only 1 out of every 4 maps has a map boss, and the second being that you can see whether a map has a map boss before you even go in. Which is nice for both early game and late game farming, because early game, a lot of builds want to prioritize clear speed and mobility, which sometimes comes at the cost of single target damage. And late game, it of course allows you to specialize your build into either a boss farmer or speed mapper. The next 2 changes are also interesting, but perhaps controversial. Every single monster inside of a map is random, and if you die in a map, you fail the map, aka 6 portals is no longer a valid defensive layer. Meaning that A, you have to get good, and B, actually specialize into some defense. And after thinking about it for a bit, I think most players will actually be fine with the system, because from my limited time playtesting, PoE2 encourages building defense and respecting monsters from the start of the game, and doesn't ever stop. So in theory, if someone manages to get to maps, they should have the skills they need to deal with whatever is in front of them. Anyways, the part that I'm super excited for is the fact that every endgame grind has an uber pinnacle boss at the end of it, which is quite exciting because no one was expecting this much content in early access, and this is exactly the type of content I would want for future speedrun challenges. The last 2 big changes in the endgame category is the Atlas tree and tablets. In PoE2, the Atlas tree is now broken into one single core tree, and individual dedicated trees for each endgame farming mechanic. For example, there is a Breach tree, where you earn Breach points by defeating progressively harder versions of the Breach Pinnacle boss. To fight the Breach Pinnacle boss, you need to farm 300 Breach Splinters, which you can farm faster by using Breach Tablets. Tablets drop from whatever mechanic you're doing, and are used on watchtowers, to then affect every single map in its radius. If you're an old school PoE1 player, you might be familiar with sextants, which is essentially what tablets and watchtowers are. The benefit of this change is we no longer need to use a million unmaking orbs to change a farming strategy, but instead we can fully max out each mechanic and change whatever we're doing at will. Which I know for myself will encourage creativity and testing, but in a speedrun context also encourages using more of what the game has to offer to build an extremely strong character. Alright, that was just number 1 in this list. There's a bit more to it, but I think I'll stop there for now. Also, I need to throw this meme in here because why not? Moving on to number 2, we have a simple one, the buyback window. If you accidentally sell something to the vendor, you can buy it back. That said, it's unknown how long the buyback window actually lasts. 20 minutes prior I sold some items, and when I checked the vendor later, the items weren't there. So either it's a very short duration, say 5 minutes, or locked to a certain town instance. Either way, it's still very useful. Number 3 is the 1 life, 1 mana flask, and 3 charm system. Charms are used automatically when a condition is met and come in 2 types, resists and immunities. For endgame players, this basically means no more flask piano, but for new players, this change is especially beneficial because it reinforces 2 obvious but important lessons, that you need to itemize resist or defense depending on the encounter, and that by endgame, you need to start building immunities. Number 4 is ascendancies and how you ascend. From a creative angle, they're kind of insane. For example, you can stop time as a chronomancer, or as an infernalist, you can literally become a demon. Honestly, every single class has some very interesting ascendancy choices, and these alone probably deserve their own video. But the exciting thing is, we actually have multiple ways to ascend. In PoE2, you can either complete the Trial of the Sakamas, aka Sanctum, or the Temple of the Chaos God, aka Ultimatum. If you're like me, and you're not the biggest Sanctum fan, this level of optionality is huge. Later on in early access, we can also expect a Krui-themed ascendancy option. Will it be the return of the Trial of the Ancestors, or something else? We'll just have to wait and see. Number 5 is the Salvage Bench, which is both an early game buff and a late game change. The Salvage Bench allows you to salvage quality items to create whetstones, armor scraps, and Arcanist etchers, and socket items for Artificer's orbs. Just like PoE1, quality improving orbs will improve an item's quality between 1 to 20% depending on the eye level of the item. In PoE1, generating quality orbs during progression was not easily accessible, but in PoE2, the opportunity to generate and use these orbs is quite frequent. This change is especially potent because for many attack-based builds, improving the quality of your weapon during progression will provide a significant damage boost. Now moving on to sockets, in Path of Exile 2, without corrupting an item, body armors and 2-handed weapons can have 2 sockets, and helms, gloves, and boots can have 1 socket. Inside these sockets you can insert either Esmite Ruins or Soul Cores. From what I can tell, ruins provide mostly simple stat buffs, such as life or resistance, and soul cores provide more interesting stats, such as increased rarity or maximum spirit. There's a lot more options, but that's the gist of it. Now in PoE 1 character item progression, to show up resist or gain late game buffs, you'd use the crafting bench. However, crafts are usually limited to a certain item type. For example, you could only craft all elemental resistances on either rings or amulets. Now there's still some limitation with the runes and soul cores, but it's only limited between weapons and armor items, meaning that you can stack a lot more one stat much more easily. For example, with 5 soul core of Topotante in armor items, we can stack 75% increased elemental ailment threshold, which is interesting because in the past, solving ailments might force you to equip a rare chest, which would sometimes limit gearing options. But in PoE 2, it's nice to see that some problems can be solved without sacrificing a fixed slots. Related to sockets is number 6, no more gem sockets in equipment. This change is amazing for new players, but great for everyone. Sometimes while leveling, you would find an insane item that would fix all the problems with your build, but had the wrong colors, and you had no chromes, fusing, or jewelers to fix the problem. Well, not anymore, because skull gems now have their own separate window. I'm quite excited about this because it encourages more creativity and experimentation, and possibly even specialization of gear for different bosses or farming routes. I'd say this is a clear example of where simple is better. Number 7 is the changes to essences and omens. Essences now come in 2 types, transmutations and regals. And that might sound confusing, but you can turn a normal into a magic with a guaranteed mod, or a magic into a rare, again with a guaranteed mod. Omens, on the other hand, modify the effect of other orbs, allowing you to target certain affixes. For example, the Omen of Sinestral Exaltation allows you to only exalt prefix modifiers, or the Omen of Dextral Annulment allows you to remove only suffix modifiers. In PoE 1, endgame metamod crafting can sometimes be convoluted, and while it still might be to a degree, I'm hopeful that by guaranteeing a lot more steps in the crafting process, late game item crafting can be much more accessible. Number 8 is WASD movement. Simply put, you can move and attack at the same time. I've playtested WASD versus click to move twice now, first time on a ranger in March and the second time on a mercenary in November, and in both playthroughs, WASD just felt superior, because you can always clear while pushing forward. That said, this might just be a build specific thing. On some builds, click to move might be better, but as this stands, WASD is my preferred choice. Number 9 is pausing. If you are playing solo and you open your passage tree, the world will pause. In the clip in the background, I was fighting the Act 2 end boss, and I was having some trouble with it. My explosive grenade mercenary build was in theory not the best, because the boss was especially resistant to fire. So in conversation with Octavian, he suggested I try switching to an armor break build, which, spoiler, wasn't the greatest, since I had spent the majority of my passage tree points on grenade nodes. So in the middle of the fight, since I could pause, I changed all of my hotkeys and gems back to my original explosive grenade build, and this time actually defeated the boss. As you can see, whether you need a breather or just want to change your gems, the pause feature is quite useful. Number 10 is the in-game wiki and in-game skill videos. Don't know how something works? No worries, just press Alt and click on the description. There's no need to Alt tab out and check an external source. Similarly, when using an uncut skill gem, you can preview how the skill works by selecting a skill and watching the in-game video. These additions are especially great for new players, but even as an experienced player, it's super appreciated. I can't even begin to tell you how much time I spent reading and rereading the wiki. In theory, this change should mean less downtime and more time spent blasting. Lastly, bonus number 11, cutscenes. I know this is not a gameplay addition, but still a welcome one. If you haven't seen the PoE 2 opening cinematic yet, then what are you doing? Go watch it. It's absolute cinema. It's interesting because in the past, the developers mentioned that they didn't want to spend excessive resources on cutscenes, but rather on the game itself. That said, at a recent press event, mostly composed of journalists and gamers from different genres, a large majority, maybe 90% plus, mentioned how important lore, world building, and story is for them and their readers. And while a traditional PoE 1 player might not care for cutscenes, most players that I talk to want the game to do well and want more people to play it. And creating cutscenes is one way of many to attract a wider audience. Furthermore, in today's world, there's a lot of not so great storytelling out there. So it's quite refreshing to experience this level of quality from GGG. With all of these changes and more, I'm expecting to get around 500 to 1000 plus hours of playtime, which is way more than I could ask for in an early access game. Anyways, expect more videos soon. Thanks for watching, and as always, have a great day, Exiles. Bye.